Let's build a log cabin birdhouse using a cedar fence picket. First thing we need to know is the thickness of our pickets, which is about 9/16. Because I need to cut a bunch of strips out of this board and I need to make sure they are square side to side. Then we're going to cut down a section of this board to 6.5 inches and see how many strips we can get out of that. Then I'm going to use a table saw to rip down these strips. Now if you don't have a table saw, that's okay. Just whatever you use, make sure your strips are as straight as possible. And I ended up with a total of 80 of these little strips, and I believe I'm going to need a total of 20 of these 6.5 long pieces. So let me cut those and I'll be right back. With the 6.5 inch pieces now complete, I now need some 4.5 inch long pieces, and 20 of them as well. And I'm just going to use the same process as before. Next, we're going to start stacking these in a 2x2 formation, about like so. But if you'll notice, there's gaps in between, so we're going to take these smaller pieces and interlace them in there to take up those gaps. Another point to note is that the sides we just cut are a heck of a lot smoother than the outside edges that are still rough, and so I'm actually going to place the smooth edges against the smooth edges so that hopefully we have much less of a chance of getting a gap in between our boards. Now if I start to assemble this as is, it's a little bit difficult to keep everything nice and square. Also, it's kind of hard to keep all these overhangs exactly even, so we're going to have to do some measurements before we start attaching these together. To figure out the overhang for each of these 6.5 long pieces, I've taken 2 of those and 1 4.5 and I've placed them together. We need to measure this out, and that comes to 5 3/4. 6.5 minus 5 3/4 is 3/4. Divide that by 2 is 3/8 overhang on each side. And if you line everything up, you can mark a bunch of them one time with a straight edge. Once we have the lines drawn, we can now take the 4.5 inch pieces and we can put them in place, and you can see the square. Now I believe it'll be a little bit easier if we construct each of these squares first and then tack them together. To hold all of this together, you can use nails, screws, glue, whatever you'd like. I believe I'm going to use a brad nailer just to make this really quick. Once we have 2 of these complete, we can now combine these together. Now if by chance they are off a little bit, not exactly square to each other, try and have the off side to the back. So figure out which side is the prettiest, and that'll be your front, and just have any offset to your rear. Now just remember, this is just going to be a birdhouse, so it doesn't have to be perfect as long as it is functional. I've attached all the squares together except for this last one. I'm actually going to make this the bottom, but of course it has a hole in it, so I'm gonna have to fix that. And to do that really easily, I'm just gonna use the remaining fence picket. We're gonna line up 2 of the corners here, or 2 of the sides, and then draw out the rest. Take this over to the saw and cut that out real quick. Now let's give this a test fit. Ooh, almost perfect, awesome. But before we secure this in place, I actually need to cut off all 4 corners, and that allows the birdhouse to have a way to drain anything out if it gets any moisture inside. Then it should look something similar to this, and to hold it in place, I just added some brad nails on the ends. Next up, we're going to create the front and back and the little roof that goes for this so we can finish this off. This is 6.5 wide, so I need the base of our triangle to be at 6.5 inches. And this should look something similar to that. Now there isn't a whole lot of surface area for me to add brad nails to hold this in place, so I think I'm going to add just a little bit of glue just to make sure it doesn't come loose, and then add brad nails on the end, and that should hold it in place. I just realized I did one step out of order. I forgot to drill the hole in the front so the bird can get in and out. But that's okay, I can still figure this one out. But before you actually attach it with glue and nails, it's a good idea to drill that hole first. Let me show you. This birdhouse is going to be built for bluebirds in our area, so I have to be very specific on the hole size. I need 1.5 inches, and this can be done with a hole saw or a Forstner bit, or whatever you'd like. Just make sure if you're doing it for bluebirds, 1.5 inches is the required size. It keeps predators out, but allows the birds to get in and out easily. Now, just in case you went out of order like I did and attached the front and top first, here's the easiest way to fix that. Get a scrap piece of wood that's long enough that will fit across the 2 walls, and you want to put it to the back of that piece, and now you want to clamp that down nice and tight, and that should support that front as you drill through it. And if you can, try and avoid using a piece of wood that has a knot in it. It makes it a little more difficult to drill through. With the hole now in place, I'm going to create the roof, but I'm going to make these a little bit wider than the actual house, so probably about 7.5, 8 inches long. I'm now going to connect these two pieces together so that it'd be a 90-degree angle. And to do that, I've sanded down this inner edge here to remove a lot of this debris and rough edges because I want to add some glue, and that way it'll be a nice tight fit. One thing we have to take in consideration whenever we're building a birdhouse is the ability to remove part of it so it can get inside and clean it out about once a season. And to do that, I'm going to make the roof a lift-off version. So I've installed an I-screw on the front and on the back of these top sections, and that'll allow me to run a string through here, tie a knot, then up through the roof and hang it. So I drilled 2 holes with a 1/4-inch bit straight up through the peak of the roof with the hopes that water will still kind of shed off the side of it and not go too much down the hole. I'm also going to use some twine instead of some string with the hopes that it looks just a little bit better. Here's a little tip for you. If you're ever trying to get rope or twine through a small hole, put some tape real tight on the end. It'll keep it from unraveling and should be able to get in that hole a little bit easier. Just like that. I then fed the rope through the I-screw and held it together with some copper wire that I just twisted tight. Then just pull the rope up through the top and it should be ready to use. And now we have a log cabin birdhouse that we can put on display. Not only look good, can have a bunch of bluebirds come and visit. This is a really simple project and I hope you get a chance to build one. So get out in your shop and have fun building.